Influencers, inspiration, and Instagram. This is Earned by Tribe Dynamics. Here's Connor Begley.
Welcome to Earned, everyone. Today we have got a doozy. I actually had a really hard time cutting down the questions. I had about twice as many questions as I have now, and I still don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them. So the stat I like to say about Scott is there probably isn't a single person in the U.S. that hasn't watched at least one of the shows that Scott helped greenlight, as well as he is the chairman of the massively successful brand Milk Makeup over the last 5 years. So Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Connor. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I am really excited for today. I've been on panels with Scott. Scott and I have become friends, but this is the time I get to ask all the questions I haven't been able to ask in the past on a recorded line, which is fun. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about Scott. So he was the president and member of the board for Turner Entertainment, which is TBS, TNT, Cartoon Network, Turner Classic Movies, as well as international properties. You were the CEO at Marvel at one point and helped to launch X-Men and the Spider-Man movie series. President at NBC Entertainment, where you greenlit The West Wing, Law and Order SVU, Scrubs, Freaks and Geeks. CEO at Friendster, president at Hearst, and board of ESPN. I mean, the list is unbelievable. It's kind of, I don't know how you fit it all into one lifetime, and you've still got a long ways to go, I think.
No, I think it means I'm old, is what it means. So, yeah.
Well, before we get into your background, I know that I've always thought that your views on the future are really spot on. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the vaccine and about COVID. Now that it's here, it's getting mass distribution. Of course, it's not going as fast as everybody wants, but there is a line of sight to when it's going to be done. How do you think consumers are going to react once everybody is vaccinated? And then how has that changed your guys' approach at Milk? Like, are you making any bets based on those views?
Well, first off, the answer I want to give is not a political answer, whether anybody did a good job or anybody did a bad job. That's not the point right now. But I will point to last week, Goldman Sachs, the day after the riots, the day after the Democrats won the Senate, they increased their GDP estimates for the U.S. from 5.9% to 6.4%, which is a huge jump. And in something you would never see written, the first line said, because the Democrats now control the Senate and the House, which would normally mean the economy would go in the toilet, they said, we are very bullish on what's going to happen in America. And, there's a lot of people, Scott Galloway's one of them, who thinks, when we get to some more perceived version of herd immunity than actual herd immunity, this is going to be like the Roaring 20s. I mean, it's going to be, because sadly, most people that are middle class and up have not been as affected as those people that are in lower incomes. And because of the inability to spend on a lot of discretionary items like movies, amusement parks, going out to restaurants, there's a lot of surplus money that's out there. And I think it's just going to be an amazing time that happens whenever that is, in April, June, July, August, and it's going to be a whole lot different. So I don't know that it's going to go on forever, though. So we just need to be mindful of that. I will say, we at Milk went into 2020 with a lot of momentum. A lot of support from Sephora. We had upgraded to a number of 3-bay gondolas. We had a front of store takeover. We had this pop-up at Times Square. We had this big collaboration thing with Billie Eilish. And every single one of those things started after March 15th. So we had paid to get them all put up and then got none of the benefit. But what I will say is, if we were to reconstitute all those opportunities, it's a fool's errand to think that whatever you were doing pre-COVID is the same as post-COVID. We saw it took 20 years to have e-com, not counting groceries, go from 0% in 2000 to basically 18% in 2020. And then once we got to 2020, it took us 6 weeks to go from 18% to 27%. So a whole decade happened. So it's hard to to believe that things are going to be the same. And I'll give you an example that Sephora stores may open. There's not going to be testers in the same way we know it. So that was really the distinction between, prestige and mass, is that you had testers. So how are we going to adjust to that? How are we going to animate new products that you can't try on, and that the fact that your brand has a red lipstick, well, what does it really look like on your lips versus my lips? And what does it smell like? And those things we have to figure out how to deal with that. And that's just one aspect of it. Not to mention, all of us have to be better at e-commerce across the board, right? E-commerce on our own sites, e-commerce on our third-party sites. I keep pushing the team that everybody says the right thing. Oh yeah, we got to do e-commerce, we got to do this, but how have we changed our resource allocation? Have we gotten rid of certain people and added new people? Not really. The only thing I'd say I learned in being in retail, and haven't been in that long, is everything is cause and effect. Nothing happens in the store that you didn't do something to deliberately make something happen. And you can do things and nothing happens, but if something happens in a store, you bet that the brand had to do some kind of thing. So I think it's incumbent upon everybody to just kind of rethink the whole game and figure out how to compete in this world that we're uncertain of. We have certain clues of where it might go, but nobody knows what it's going to be like.
Yeah, the explosion in consumer spending, I just think about these restaurants where it's like they've kind of had to turtle for a really long time, just kind of buckle down. But once it really does hit at least perceived herd community, I think it's just going to explode. Travel is a little bit more restricted, but travel, food, it's going to be exciting. I think on the resource allocation front, this actually reminds me a lot of the interview I had with Kevin last time. Right, so Kevin Gould, they've exploded in revenue, done really well. One of the tactics they did that I thought was wild is they literally direct message every single Instagram follower they have, and it's actually turned into a massive direct sales channel for them. And what we're seeing is I'm hearing from a lot of brands, at least the forward-leaning ones, that they're using their field staff to do that kind of interaction at scale online. Versus having to lay them off or furlough them or whatever. So yeah, there's a lot of innovation happening. I think most organizations still haven't adapted to the fact that things are actually going to be quite a bit different on the other side.
And Tim, our new CEO, has done a good job of trying different things. Some of them, I'm not sure which ones are secret and which ones are out there, but along the lines of redeploying the field staff, doing new things is one of them. But I saw a presentation from, I can't remember who it was, but they had these 8 categories of spending, and it was like, cruising, hotels, airlines, concerts, movies, things that went away, right? And yet GDP spending stayed about the same, and you saw the shift of GDP spending. But the two things that were really interesting was they had 2 bumps, and the bumps were pretty material. They were like 3 or 4% bumps, which is huge on GDP in any given month. And It was Mother's Day, and Father's Day. And because you weren't going on the bungee jumping trip or you weren't doing this, you had more discretionary income to gift something, And the corollary to that was the huge spike in fragrance sales, which hadn't happened in a while, that happened in third quarter, was basically that they're a highly giftable thing. There's no shade. There's a perception of value, So the world's going to change a little bit, and so you've got to adapt to it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to take a step back just because your career in entertainment was fairly prolific. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit. I mean, coming out of USC, you went kind of straight into the field. What drew you to entertainment? What drew you to entertainment?
Well, so it's kind of a funny but complicated story. So I went to USC, and I grew up in a really middle class background in a place called Torrance. And when I went to USC, my parents said to me, "Do not join a fraternity." So I joined a fraternity, okay? And so I'm going to my second football game, and at USC you walk from the campus through this park, and on the way to the park, the guy in front of me, it's 11 a.m. in the morning, is so drunk, he falls in the gutter, and I had to pull him out of the gutter. So I pulled this guy out of the gutter, and it was a guy who had graduated the year before who had come back, and he saw my pledge print and said, "I'm gonna remember you. I was in that fraternity." And I said, "Well, I'm the only Asian guy in any fraternity, so you probably will remember me." At the same time, this guy was a real operator. He had, started a newspaper at school that was kind of like Page Six or the National Enquirer, called the Row Run. He created a business called Brownie Points, where these brownies I'd give you as a compliment for helping me out or something like that. He was Cosmopolitan Bachelor of the Month. He was a real operator, right? And he was in the entertainment business. And and I'd read an article in the LA Times called "Baby Moguls: What Behind the Ears," and it was about all these people that were under 30 that had these gigantic jobs. So I thought, but I found out later that they had big titles and they had to ask, somebody to get their pencil sharpened, but it sounded pretty impressive. They were president of production or whatever. And my father died when I was 5, and my first girlfriend died a day before my 16th birthday. So I was obsessed with being successful at a young age. So this guy said to me, if you want to start out in entertainment, you have to start out in the mailroom. So coincidentally, I was not a great student. I was involved in a lot of outside activities, and I didn't graduate. I failed out of college because I had almost enough credits, but my grade point average was under 2.0. So I didn't want to tell my parents, and I decided I was going to go work in a mailroom. And the year I graduated, there was an actor strike, a writer strike, and a director strike. So I sat at home making these phone calls, trying to get in the mailroom, and I had no contacts in entertainment. My family didn't have any contacts. And there was a guy named Tom Wilhite who went from being a, quote, low-level assistant to the head of Rogers & Cowan, which was the biggest PR firm in entertainment at the time, to being president of production at Disney prior to Eisner and Katzenberg getting there. So I started calling Rogers & Cowan along with CAA and Warner Brothers and places to get a job. And this woman named Marilyn Marcus would hang up on me every day. So just for sport, I'd call her every day and just call her to bother her. And so one day I call her up and she's really nice to me. She goes, oh yeah, I see your resume here. How soon can you be here? I said, I lived a half hour away, so I'll be there in 30 minutes. So I drive up and I'm sitting in the lobby and this woman comes out to get me. And the only way I can describe it, on a scale of 1 to 10, she was like an 11. And I said, you're Marilyn Marcus, the office manager? She goes, oh, no, she's on maternity leave. I'm Madeline Marks. I'm a singer. And ironically, that week she happened to be in People magazine for her singing. And
oh, wow.
So I got this job in entertainment making $150 a week. I learned what a low-level assistant was. I was just a slave. I worked for one of the founders. And while I was there, the guy I pulled out of the gutter said to me, I don't know if you're smart, but you've listened to everything I said. I work for this guy, Ted Turner, in Atlanta, and I'm getting married. You can come and work for Ted Turner. And I said, yesterday I was with Paul Newman and Robert Redford, and I had to go pick up their laundry and stuff. Why would I leave this to go to Atlanta? But then I met Ted, and we hit it off. And, we became, I don't know how, really close. There weren't that many middle managers at Turner. And there was a party at this cable show, and I threw this party at the USC marching band and all this, and he loved it. He said, I will let you do anything you want to do. I said, and MTV just started. I said, I want to do a music video show. He goes, not that, that's devil music. And I said, well, that's what I want to do. And I was in sales promotion, and I ended up letting me do the show. It beat MTV, and the company lost like $10 million that year, and I made $11 million on my little show on the weekend. And so one day I quit because I got bored being in Atlanta, and I was 25, and I was living in LA, and Ted called me up and said, you need to come back. And I took a red eye, and I'm sitting on the couch in front of the boardroom after taking the red eye. And he goes, how old are you? I said, I'm 25. He said, you're about to be the youngest person to ever start a cable network and the youngest person probably to ever run one. And he let me, we were put up by the cable operators to ruin the MTV IPO. So I started this channel that then took the MTV stock price from 20 to 13, and it got bought, and it became VH1. And then I thought I'd never work again. And when I was at Turner, I worked on a project called TNT, which was not TNT. It was actually the precursor to the Fox network. We were going to combine the Metro Media stations with TBS and turn it into a network. And I did the presentation when I was like 23, and the guy I sat next to was a guy named Jamie Kellner, and Jamie became the first CEO of the Fox network. So I did the business plan for the Fox network with Barry Diller and Rupert on my little Macintosh, and I worked there and had, the way I like to describe it, I had one amazing year with Barry and one really nightmarish year with Barry, but I ended up leaving. And I got called, actually, because it plays in later, I met a guy named Don Ohlmeyer on the last show I did for Fox, which was the Emmys. And I said, after this show airs, I'm going to be fired. And he goes, well, why don't you work for me? So I went to work for Don. And he said, he had this production company. And I went into him one day, I said, Don, I'm really sorry, but I got offered this job to go back to Turner. Turner had gone bankrupt on the MGM library, but they allowed him to start this thing, TNT. I said, they want me to run TNT. And Don looked at me and said, Scotty, Ted's crazy. This is never going to work. You shouldn't leave and do it. So I ended up doing it. TNT was the largest cable launch ever. And I gave Don a TV movie to do with Faye Dunaway, and at the premiere, he put his arm around me and said, I'm so glad I got you to do this, after told me not to do it. In this time period, from 88 to 90, everybody either died or quit in front of me, and I ended up running entertainment. So I started TNT, Cartoon Network, Turner Classic Movies, those channels around the world. And there's a funny story that when I was at Rogers and Cowan in the mailroom, there was a woman who, her mom was a movie producer. And I said, I need to meet your mom. And she goes, why? I said, because I want to produce movies. So she goes, okay. So she sets me up with this woman's mom. I meet her at like 6:30 at night in her office. And I walk in and she goes, what are you here for? What do you want to do? I said, I want to package movies. And she goes, do you know what that means? I said, I have no idea. And she goes, okay. Did you go to film school? I said, no. She goes, have you ever worked on a movie? No. Have you ever written a movie? No. Have you ever made a movie? No. And you want to make movies. And 10 years later, in 1992, Ted Turner gave Amy Pascal and I $300 million. We made Any Given Sunday, You Got Mail, Practical Magic, City of Angels. So Ted let me do all these things. And
cool.
Then, so it was a great way to learn. And, I was on the board of the company, and it was great,
What do you think made Ted Turner so successful himself? I mean, that's a pretty special relationship to have.
Well, the thing about Ted was that he didn't get caught in the details. And there's a story I like to tell. We were looking to buy the Hanna-Barbera library. And it'd been a guy named Carl Linder who owned Chiquita Bananas and insurance companies, and he happened to own Hanna-Barbera. And the underbids, every studio, Paramount, Disney, Fox, Warner Brothers, all bid between $175 and $225. So I just hired a woman from Allen and Company, and we were taking a deck over to Ted, and Ted was going to go meet Carl Linder in a airplane hangar in Cincinnati to do the deal. So this woman from Allen and Company said, we should have a bid session. I said, okay, watch this. So we go to Ted's office, and he looks at the deck. He goes, this is fantastic. I'm ready. And he gets up. I go, whoa, before you go, we need to have a bid session. He goes, what's that? I said, I'm Carl Linder, you're you, and we kind of game out what's going to happen. He goes, great. And he starts walking me in the group out the door. I go, no, can't do that. Because if you overpay, I'm the board member in charge of entertainment. I'm going to get blamed. So you need to sit there and we need to talk about this. So he said to me, so I own the Warner Brothers and MGM cartoons, which are like Bugs Bunny, Tom and Jerry, the best cartoons. What did I pay for those? And how many do I have? So I tell him. And he goes, and how many are there at Hanna-Barbera? And I tell him how many there are. And he goes, 350 million. I said, well, okay, that's interesting on a lot of levels. I said, first, you're shitty at math, okay? Secondly, those aren't the same kind of cartoons. Third, the underbids are 175 to 225. And so I made him stand there, and I finally said, on my life, on your kid's life, you have to bid 325 million or less. And he agreed, and he bought the company for 325. We get the company closed, we produce this tape, we announced the Cartoon Network, and the stock went up $1 billion. every studio head who didn't bid for it called me and said, didn't see it. Now, to make the story even more interesting, when Ted was going bankrupt buying MGM, he traded the MGM UA name and the UA library for the cartoons. Everybody thought he was crazy, but he knew cartoons were valuable. So the point of it is that all those studios had Harvard MBAs that did discounted cash flow and 5 other kind of analysis as to the value. But that only told you what it was worth as it was. What Ted Turner, Rupert Murdoch, what those guys were able to do is see what it could be, and that's what it was. He had really great vision. Literally, he was only in the office 2 days a month. The rest of the time he was hunting and fishing. And I talked to him, and his mind was like so uncluttered about this, but it was a great experience, all the way around.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Richard Branson in terms of his approach, right? I don't think he's ever in an office. Probably very different people, but so let's talk, I want to get into kind of all the milk makeup stuff, influencer marketing, but I think one last question. Well, I also want to talk about your tech stint for a minute. But while you were at NBC, you guys, when you came in, some of the headlines were that NBC was in decline. And you guys really kind of came out of that, right? As one of the top networks while you were there. And then you also greenlit a number of shows that were, these are all-timers, right? SVU, West Wing. One, what do you think caused NBC to come out of that decline? Or what would you say caused it to do even better once you took over the entertainment division? And then two, what were the common characteristics of those shows that were really successful? And this is, again, I don't think anybody on this podcast is in entertainment, but I'm just like super curious. It's such a world that I'm unfamiliar with.
Well, the one thing I know, it was such a long time ago, that at Milk Makeup, if I say I did Friends, they go, oh, that's my aunt's favorite show. She watches the reruns on Lifetime or something like that, So it was a long time ago. And so let me explain the context. There were a handful of cable networks. People didn't have hundreds of channels. They had 40 channels-ish. There used to be a rule in TV that if you can reach 50% of the audience 2.5 times or more, that was how you sold a product, a new car, a movie, or whatever. We were so powerful on Thursday night with Friends, some show that wasn't good, Frasier or Will and Grace, some other show that wasn't good, and ER. And when I say the shows that weren't that good, they were like Just Shoot Me or whatever. Literally, I could do a sitcom with the two of us, and because you didn't have TiVo, you didn't have the internet, you had to watch through, And so it was all brute force. And in one night, buying 3 commercials, you can get 50% of America 2.5 times. Today, if you run a spot every hour, 24/7, on NBC, CNBC, MSNBC, Bravo, E, you can't do it. Okay, wow. So it was a time we were like monsters, so it was a whole different time. And, you weren't programming for really the plurality of America. You were programming for any niches. You were just programming for a broad audience, right?
Yep.
And I'd like to tell you that I was some kind of programming genius, okay? But there's a saying about people at movie companies that if you take all the movies a movie guy made and all the movies he didn't make, they'd add up to the same number, okay? Because, and it's really, it's not that you do anything. The way I would describe it, it's sort of like you walk into 7-Eleven and sometimes you get shot in the head and other times you win the lottery. And it really comes down to TV is not about Conor and Scott write a story about their lives and it turns out to be Parasite and it wins the Oscar. That doesn't happen in TV. TV is a marathon. It's 100 episodes. And there's a skill that you learn to be able to protect characters for 100 episodes. So, somebody like Aaron Sorkin, you bet Tina Fey, you bet on talent, right? That understands that mechanics in doing it. But, I was number 1 3 out of the 4 years I was there. And the thing I used to say is, this is barely a fun job. I can't even imagine being number 2 or number 3, what that's like. Because the thing that you got to realize is every day in 120 newspapers, your market share gets printed in front of everybody, your grandmother, everybody. You know what you did last night. and everybody looks at you like you chose, there was Seinfeld and then this crappy show and you chose the crappy show. No, there were two crappy shows, and there are no other creative pursuits that have a statutory amount of product you have to produce. Pay cable doesn't do it. When we did The West, when we were competing against The Sopranos, David Chase turned it in wherever he wanted to. Some episodes were 30 minutes, some episodes were like 70 minutes. He could use language. Aaron Sorkin delivered 22 episodes a year while doing Sports Night, adhered to standards, and put 4 commercial breaks in. That's hard.
Yeah.
It's a really difficult business, but I wasn't out till 3 a.m. finishing shows. But it's it was a point in time in life that was really fun.
Yeah, no, I'd have to imagine. Well, let's talk really quickly before we get into milk about your time in tech, right? Because you made a kind of pivot at one point and took over as the CEO of Friendster, which was like, I think the reason it's fascinating to me is it was like one of the first really big social networks, and then obviously launched your own company, which ironically was named Uber, but not that Uber, a different kind of Uber. So what made you decide to get into tech? And then what made you decide to get out of tech? And what did you learn during that time?
Yeah. So there was a guy named David Siminoff who was a very successful investor. He got out of Stanford Business School, and he went to a firm and he asked the partners to put money up for these 2 kids that he knew from being a TA at Stanford. And the 2 kids were Dave Feil and Jerry Yang. It was Yahoo. And so they were seed money for Yahoo. And then he bet on 5 companies. I only know the 4 that worked, but it was AOL, Amazon, eBay, and Yahoo. And so his career was made when he was 27. Right. And so we talked to David all the time, and he'd give me these TV show ideas, and I'd say, you can't do it because of this. And I'd give him my tech ideas. And he said, in the same way that I'm never going to do a TV show sitting up here, you're never going to be in Silicon Valley unless you come to Silicon Valley. And, when I was at NBC, I inherited NBC.com. I was on the board of our digital businesses, and I really liked it. And, so I didn't know what the internet was about, but I knew that the internet was going to be something. And I ran this keyword buying company, and then I went to Friendster. There were a lot of technical challenges at Friendster, and that wasn't the big mistake. The big mistake was I met a guy named Mark Zuckerberg when he was 18, and he offered me 7% of the company for $700,000. And I didn't know you could invest in competitive companies, but then I would have never met you, and I would have never been in makeup. And then, then I left. I started my own company, and there's something that kind of transcends all careers, and you should never be in a company where your talent isn't the most important talent at the company. And in a startup, at that time, coding was really important. I would say user experience and now acceleration of community is important, but at the time you really had to understand coding, and I learned a lot. I can tell you a lot about how I've talked to your co-founder about how things work technically, and I only know enough to be dangerous, but I think it's really important that you're at a company where the skill that you have is super valuable. And that wasn't quite the case. So it was, it was a good lesson though. And I do think, now when it cracks me up when I'm in a room with a engineer that works, at Hearst, and these guys would say, you can't do that. And I'm like, really? Let me tell you how you do it. And so I'm glad I have that foundation of knowledge, because look, the lingua franca of what's going to happen going forward, everything's digital.
Yep.
And so if you don't understand how these things work, you're going to be the equivalent of like a migrant farm worker or a blacksmith. You really have to understand how the technology works. That doesn't mean you have to code, but you just have to have a basic understanding how things work.
Yeah, I've never heard it said that way, but it makes a ton of sense. Like you want your role to be one of the core competencies of the business itself, right? Like that's the area that you want to be in.
Well, the irony is, they had an opening to run Xbox at Microsoft, and I knew Bill Gates relatively well, and I knew that they had a complete disdain for anybody who wasn't, an engineer. So I didn't go there because I knew I would be sat at the kids' table, and they'd be like, oh yeah. And as it was at Friendster, every day the engineers, I'd walk in and they would literally greet me by saying, how's our brain dead entertainment executive doing today? And I knew the day they stopped saying that was the day I had problems. But, but then I ended up, being at a company that I probably shouldn't have been at. But it was a great learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a super cool experience. I had a similar, honestly, this was maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago now. But when I was at my first job out of school, someone I knew really well got recruited to Facebook. And they tried to recruit me there as well. But I knew that within Facebook, sales was not actually looked very fondly upon at the time. Mm. If you weren't a coder, you didn't matter. And that was part of the reason I didn't go. I was like, no. I sure would have loved those stock options from 10 years ago,
And when I worked for Ron Perlman, I ran Marvel, and Ron, everybody that worked there, we had breakfast every day together. There were like 12 of us. And everybody was a lawyer or a banker. And then there were Jerry Levin, who ran Revlon, myself, Jerry Ford, who ran the bank. I kind of felt like they would pat us on the head and go, that's great. That's great. That was, I mean, he was amazing to me, and he was great in terms of it was an amazing job, but I realized that I was like, a sideshow act.
Yeah. Well, so let's start talking about Milk a little bit. So obviously you guys have been, super successful over the last 5 years. I know things go up and they go down, but in general, your trajectory's been kind of off the charts. What were there any lessons from your kind of previous career that you brought to Milk? Because this is a totally new industry. First time you've really been kind of in a brand that's focused solely around consumer products. What did you draw with you that's made, that's helped you make the brand successful? Obviously, it's not a one-man show.
Well, so when I was at Marvel, I ran a trading card company. I ran a sticker company. Marvel had a toy company. So I learned that inventory is a cruel mistress. I mean, it's a tough business, right? I knew the fundamentals of it. And Rossi, who started Milk, was a really good friend of mine. And ironically, I introduced him to a Chinese friend of mine his family owns a bunch of retail, like the third biggest department store in the world, and a big shopping center in Beijing. And I was trying to get him to put a Milk Studios in and do a line like Mac in China, and we never got anywhere with it. And then I was at a point in my life where Rossi asked me to help him, and I had the ability to do it. So I said, okay, I'll help you raise money. And I got into it, and I learned about makeup, and this is the time when Too Faced was selling for a lot of money, and It Cosmetics sold for a lot of money. And I started thinking about it, going, well, wait, this is kind of interesting, because there are these big companies who are really happy buying these independent companies, and they don't seem like they're good at starting them. So you can sell these companies if you're good at it. And then I guess a couple things. The best thing that happened to me is for many years, and how I met you, I sat next to Diana Ruth, who did product, and I absorbed so much from being with her and learning about product. So that was really important. But the big thing I learned is that the new marketing is two things, right? It's influencers, what we'll talk about, or digital. And the other thing is, in this new world, the new marketing is storytelling. And I kind of knew about storytelling, but when you're 50 years old, your ability to think about what people 18 to 49 like, you can say you understand, but you don't, because you have a different life experience, right? And so this was a good way to kind of still use the storytelling in an interesting way. So the thing about Milk Makeup is, I think everybody did it for pure reasons. Nobody was doing it just to make money, right? Rossi had this brand at Milk that had a great community around it, and he really wanted to do something that served that community. Diana loved making products and understood products. And Janet Gerwich, who I don't know if you know, but Janet was very helpful early on with me, and she said something to me that in makeup, it's not one thing you do right. It's a million things you do every day. This is a product that people are taking, buying, putting it home in their bathrooms, putting it on their face. It's a very intimate relationship, and everything's got to be right about it, right? There are hundreds of red lipsticks. If your red lipstick doesn't have the right feel in hand, the right brand when you show it, the right lay down, the right smell, the right texture, it's just all these things go into it. And so we, I think it was good that we had this community, and we had somebody like Diana. And then the third thing I'd say is that we had Sephora, who really got it and got the brand. We kind of started off in a nice way with Sephora and Urban Outfitters, and Sephora ended up working out really well. And we raised money, and I realized that if I left, they'd probably put a salesperson in the job of running the company if I left. And when I say that, when Steve Jobs won the Harvard Business School Entrepreneur of the Year for the second time, they asked him, "How did you do it?" And he said, "Well, when you have a company, you start out with version 1, and you take version 1 to the board, and everybody gets excited, and it sells, and everybody's even more excited. Then you bring version 2, and they're really excited, and version 2 does better, and version 3, and version 4, and about version 5, right before you're going to present the new product, this guy in the corner says, or this woman in the corner says, 'Hey, I just made a big sale in Europe.' And all the business people turn to that person. And next thing you know, the next meeting starts at sales and not with product." And then he made a joke, and he said, Gil Amelio, who replaced him, was a sales guy. And he said, "Where did Steve Ballmer come from? Sales," right? You stop being a product-led company. And I think the real key thing to Milk Makeup is we did a lot of stupid things that turned out to be stupid. And we did a lot of stupid things that turned out to be genius. And you can't tell what's going to be what. I was showing the original line to somebody, and the 3 or 4 products that everybody in our company knew about beauty said were going to be great, whiffed. Cooling water, which was on the bottom row, the lowest shelf on its own, no promotion, became our number 1 product, right? And so what I wanted to make sure we did was that we didn't lose the ability to take risk. And really what I did in entertainment was you took people who were a little crazy, super creative, and you tried to make a commercial version of what they did without screwing up who they were. And that's kind of what beauty is, right? I saw it as my role to sort of make sure that Diana and Rossi, their craziness was sort of mitigated but not stifled. And then what happened was I actually liked the business, and we started getting more and more successful, and then I started getting offers to do other beauty stuff, and so it's just, I guess I'm kind of a beauty person now. By default. Yeah, but I would say that Milk's biggest success is that we knew where our community was. We didn't build product based upon marketing stats. I mean, Diana's really fond of saying, I built products that people wanted, And there are brands that were launched by big companies where somebody in marketing was like, millennials like 3 of these and these colors, and we need to have this and that. Like, artificial intelligence and algorithms regresses you to the middle. You won't fail, but you won't wildly succeed. You'll be in the middle of, metaphorically, the Peloton and the Tour de France, and you're not gonna pass anybody. You're just gonna be in the middle. Hold on, my dog might want to go out. Okay, no, we're okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that. I mean, there's so many nuggets in there in what you said. I mean, I think the intimate component, like I'd never really heard it described as that, as it's a very intimate product, because it is. And then secondarily on the kind of being a product-led company, the thing that we talk a lot about, or that I talk a lot about, is that the internet, amplifies whatever you're going to do, right? So if it's really great, it's going to amplify it in that direction. If it's really shitty, people are going to figure it out really quickly. And that actually hasn't always been the case when it came to products, right? In the past, if you had really good distribution and you had a lot of money, you could buy all of Thursday night on, NBC and generate a lot of sales with a fairly mediocre product. But now that's not necessarily the case. So that's super cool.
So what I would say is, in the past, what's called pre-internet, because the internet's going to be the change. In the past, you would say, is it useful? Does it solve a problem? Does it have utility, right? So you're not going to buy a product that you don't know you have a problem for, right? Then the second thing was usability. Does the shirt fit nice? Does the car drive? Is the website good, right? And then in the old days, as you point out, you produce a bunch of ads, there's no ratings, no reviews, and you just force feed the thing and it shows up in the center aisle at the end cap of your supermarket and it's a hit, right? Well, today, it's got to have that problem solving, it's got to be useful, it has to have good usability, but now it has to have this new thing, desirability, right? Because if, with ratings, reviews, ingredients, that transparency, you can't produce bad products. What digital does today is it rewards greatness, but it punishes mediocrity. Bad is gone. And that's what you've got to do, is you've got to create that demand where you'll crawl through glass to get something because there's too many options, and we were talking about Steve Jobs. Everybody knew about the Steve Jobs movie, but people didn't go because you didn't give people reason to go, yet they waited in line to buy iPhones and all that stuff, right? So you've got to figure out that desirability portion of it, and that's super important. And that's what, the Milk brand did, the industrial design, the visual merchandising with the gondolas that were different. It created this kind of like difference where we stood out enough that people were interested.
Yeah, the phrase I always liked there, it was from Ian Rogers, who's the old chief digital officer at LVMH, and then formerly the CEO of Apple Music, and then CTO of Beats prior to acquisition. He called it the hyper efficiency of quality, right? And you can determine quality however you want to, whether that's desirability or otherwise. But it's the internet's a great amplifier. So let's talk a little bit about influencers, because obviously that's what a lot of the people that are going to be listening to this are in the business of. You guys decided really early on that influencers were a thing. And that's been really reflected in your success. So I was looking up the numbers before this podcast. You guys went from the number 88th ranked skincare brand in 2017 to now the number 12 by EMV for 2020, which is just
color brand.
Yes, makeup brand. But go ahead. So what made you decide that was really important? And then what do you think are some of the philosophies that led to your growth, right? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have decided it's important, but there's hardly anybody that's done what you guys have done over the last 4 years.
Well, the thing about influencers is that it starts out as this black art where you think, oh, influencers. And one of the areas where we made huge mistakes was that Rossi knew a lot of famous people and he thought they were influencers. No, they're famous people, right? And you can't, just because you're famous doesn't mean you can sell makeup, right? Because there has to be this credibility around what you're doing. And, we tried in a bad way. We had no idea what EMV was. We had no idea what Tribe was. And we kind of, went on this fool's errand of trying stuff. And then, I met you and I learned about it and did some work. And there was sort of a two-pronged approach. One approach was that I really believed from working at Friendster and working in social media that trusted referrals were important. And that was incontrovertible. But the other thing that was really clear, and, for all the companies starting out, the EMV that Tribe puts out is a barometer, meaning a forecaster of a brand's health. And you can look forward and see if a brand is ascending or descending based upon the relationship of your EMV to your sales. And I bought into that pretty quickly because, not because I believed in that, but because I learned that every single strategic and every single VC was looking at some version of it. So it's like you can sit there and complain that it doesn't work, but if that's the currency people are going for, well, you better figure it out, right? And that was the first step. And the second step is we tried to get EMV going and it didn't get going. And then the third step was we brought in a team of people that were super experienced from Benefit, and they were really smart. And they understood EMV, and it was like, we were able to dunk the basketball. It was just this crazy thing happened. But I will say, and I've told you this, because 1 year you said, well, you guys done a good job, and I said, I think we've done a bad job because we lost that team. They went someplace else. We had this civil war inside the company between the people that were just trying to drive EMV and the brand people. And I think that we did some suboptimal things for the brand that we we started developing products that were always on products so we would get more EMV. And they were products that were somewhat antithetical to the sort of values of what milk makeup was, this fresh face look. And we were doing stuff. And so we pulled back on that, and I think we're in a place now where, we're close on the cusp of being a top 10 brand. We were top 10 brand, I think, once, but we're doing it, not organic. We're doing it totally organically, and we're doing it, not sort of doing the artificial things to get things going. We're kind of doing it our way, and we feel really good about what that means. And it's, from when NBC was owned by GE, and I had to learn Six Sigma and all that. And the basic rule of Six Sigma is, if you take people and you measure something and make them live up to a measurement, they will do better. Because they'll want to be, and so that's what it does. It gives us a North Star, and we don't kind of go, oh, we were good last month. We had this event and that event. It's like, what did the event do? And it allows us to weigh those events, and I'm not going to say that and you would neither say that any given campaign or post is accurate, but it's directionally correct, right? And it's been really good to focus us. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Talk to me a little bit about that organic versus paid argument. Obviously, this is a discussion we have a lot. And I think there are a lot of brands that think that the only way they can win is if they're out paying influencers. But I think you guys are, you're bucking that trend. Talk to me about why did you guys decide that was the path? And then just talk to me about it a little bit.
Well, we decided that was the path through either naivete, ignorance, or hubris, or a combination of those three things. And when I say this next thing, it's going to borderline on hubris, and I don't mean it to sound that way. But there are certain brands that influencers don't want to be associated with, or really don't care to be associated with. And we were fortunate at Milk that we had this patina around us from Milk Studios, the kind of people that were around it. And if you don't know what Milk Studios is, look it up. It's a really hot, content creation place. And that allowed us to do that. And I think it's really hard to wade into the pool and pay these people but not pay these people, because people talk. And so you kind of have to be one or the other. And we are fortunate that to date, people seem to be interested in the brand at large, what we do, and what the values, because we do stand for values. We went out, and this is not a brand that's just about making money. We've been very big on LGBTQ issues. We've never sexualized any of the models. We've done things that have been, we had a transgendered person on in our first gondola before Caitlyn Jenner. And when Caitlyn Jenner came, we looked like geniuses. And I'll tell you, when they put this person on, there wasn't a debate it was like, oh, that person has brown hair, looks good, let's put him on. It wasn't that oh, we need to have that person, So it was a really organic set of values that I think resonated with people. And, so I think we feel lucky that we're in that situation. But I do prescribe to the EMV piece is a business, right? There is the creative side to it. And Tim and Max and Abby and the team, are very good about sort of pivoting. We call the influencers, content partners, creative partners. And, I think you were the one who told me this, that this is a numbers game. It's a relationship game, that the more bodies you throw, and the bodies, almost like salespeople, have quotas for these 1,000 influencers or these 500 influencers should generate 6 million, and your 500 should generate 7 million, right? And that's how it's making people accountable. And it just, it's a numbers game, and that doesn't mean you can just call these people up. You have to have a good brand, a good strategy, a good way of approaching them, and I think the biggest thing is, it's like big actors. You don't go up to a big actor and say, hey, I'm going to pay you this money and you should take the job. They don't care. Everybody's offering them $20 million. You have to know how to romance them into doing it. And if you're the last person that shows up, they're really not interested in you. And, you said early on to our team, that we need to build these relationships and build them up over time. And I think I'm glad that you said that early on, that we focused on sort of mid-level and, and smaller people that ended up growing. And also, creating micro initiatives around people around Milk, baby influencers, makeup artists, that didn't amount to a lot. We don't have any one big person, but the aggregate of 500, 600 people gives us 3 million here and 5 million there. And, so it just really focusing and being deliberate that you have a path to get to those numbers, right? Just hope is not a business plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think, implementing measurement is obviously really critical. And then I think the mistake that we see really commonly at brands, you guys scaled it up, but one of the big things we see is we'll see brands that have 15,000 influencers that talk about them in a given year. And they've got a team of 2 or 3 people. And it's there's no way that 2 people can manage 15,000 relationships. It's just not possible. And on top of that, every time one of those people talks about that brand, right, and never hears from that brand, but then they talk about Milk and somebody from Milk personally reaches out, introduces themselves, thanks them for talking about the brand, asks them if there's anything else they'd like to try, right? That's where it's going. That's why you're winning. So it's really cool to hear it play out. I'm glad my advice from 4 or 5 years ago was mostly accurate.
As much as I hate to say it, it was. Okay, it was really important to what we did. You were a great mentor in this area. But the thing you're saying is really true. It's I look at social and influencers as kind of like a friend, and that friend that every time you see them is saying, "Hey Connor, can I borrow $5? Hey Connor, can you drive me here? Hey Connor, can you do that?" And if your social's basically saying bye, it's not fun, right? And in the same way, if you're going to an influencer, will you post and well, what are you doing for the influencer? And so before COVID, we would do these workshops where we would help people learn how to shoot content. We'd help people, Diana would come out and talk about how you start your own brand, product development. It's a two-way street, and it really is. And you said this, I remember the first time you spoke to the team, it's about having a real deep relationship where you're not this carpetbagger that shows up and, no brand is cool enough to stand out amongst other brands that, I'm going to promote you because it's such a great brand. No, it's a relationship.
Yeah.
And you got to have those great relationships.
Totally. Well, before we get into, I got one last question, and then we'll get into some fun end of show questions that you actually haven't seen. But before we get into that, you guys decided, you said you wanted to stick around in the brand to ensure it was product led. And I think this month is your 1-year anniversary of bringing on Tim as the official CEO of Milk. What made you guys decide that you needed a new CEO? And then what was it specifically about Tim that made it feel like a right fit?
Yeah, so we always knew we were going to bring a CEO in, and I made movies when I was never in the movie business, right? I was 25 when I started a TV network, and those things are pretty straightforward. I watched TV as a kid. I ran the NBC station group, and it was because I understood news, because when I was a kid, I used to watch the news. And I understood that at the end of this news, the 2 people there threw to the next people. I just understood it, right, as a consumer. I would say that makeup, you need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of makeup. You can't fake it. You can fake it for a while. And, we brought in this person who was really good at influencers, and Rossi, who's really good at throwing parties and things like that. We were launching Kush Mascara, and it wasn't just Rossi, it was the other women that worked in the company. And Rossi was like, we're going to have Kush Mascara, we're going to have Wiz Khalifa, we're going to have this concert and all this stuff. And the woman just calmly looks at him and says, "So you're going to have influencers?" He goes, "Of course, that's the whole point, to have influencers." She goes, "Okay, so you're going to have Wiz Khalifa on a dark stage. Is he going to be holding the product? What's the opportunity for the influencers to take pictures with them? You're going to spend all this money on this person and you're not going to get any content." And so we shifted the thing. So it wasn't a party with Wiz Khalifa. It was 7 stations. And each station had a benefit of the brand or the Kush product. And those were, that's how we did it, right? So then Rossi was like, "Yeah." She goes, "But you're going to have a party." And he goes, Yeah, party for sure. That's what we do. We throw parties. We throw great parties." And she said, "Did you ever stop to think that probably 60-70% of influencers wear false eyelashes at night? So if you have a party, they're not going to wear your mascara." It was that was the drop the mic moment of oh yeah, and it's there are all these nuances of, you really need to understand the interdependency of one product to the next. And the story I normally tell, I don't want to tell in public, but like as I've learned how makeup works, you need to be smart. It's not like, Carol Hamilton, who's been great to us, I asked her about us getting into the palette business, and because everybody, our investors, like, get in the palette business. It's great because they were in Too Faced, like, do it. And I went to Carol. I said, Carol, I just have a feeling that the palette business is not like throw 8 colors in a thing. Like, there's a science about it. I would compare it to Madden football, that you do Madden football and then every year you improve the cover 2 defense and every year you improve the linebackers and you just get better and better by doing it. She goes, exactly. You get better through iteration. And but from the outside you'd be like, oh, well, just throw a bunch of colors in that I like, but it's scientific. And you totally. Really have to have that experience. And so, like, you can get a certain distance by doing the things that you like, but to become a real brand, you have to have somebody who understands the nuances. And Tim was a guy who, ran L'Oreal Paris. He'd worked at a number of L'Oreal brands, worked in Singapore, worked in the UK, worked in Canada. And it was funny because everybody who worked in mass just interviewed poorly, for the most part. And yeah. Tim, it was plain that he understood makeup, and he understood makeup, and he also respected the brand, and he understood what the brand had to be. And then as a person, I liked him. And actually, Rossi liked somebody else who was a woman. I said, no, we're going to hire this guy. And he's like, no, we're going to hire this woman because I want a woman to run it. And then, unfortunately, the woman's father got really sick. But Tim was the right person. And I've told that woman, even though your dad got sick, you probably weren't the right person for us. And I always thought Tim was right. But just to digress 1 minute so you get the feeling on the mass people. So this one person came in, and I found him really impressive, really smart in mass, and he had been a marketer that became head of a brand. And so he had this thing in his resume about like doing an Instagram book that he published. So when Diana, who is our product person, I said, you're going to meet Diana. And, you need to like impress Diana because she's the person. And so I said, do not mention the Instagram thing because Diana is not going to look kindly on that. And the guy leads off by talking about the Instagram thing. And so he's already in a hole. And so I'm trying to get him out of the hole. So I said, listen, you told me about such and such thing that you did, which I thought was super innovative. And can we talk about that? He goes, I have a better idea. Let me tell you about my most successful promotion. As a big idea, I ended up pricing everything at $5.99, and I thought Diana's head was going to explode. Like, that's exactly what you don't want to hear in prestige. So, but Tim really got the brand. He really got he really got the business part of it, and understood the difference between prestige and mass, understood makeup in a way that was, really, really detail oriented. And you want somebody who's your CEO that is macro focused, but detail oriented. And he's both of those things.
That's very cool. Well, let's get into the end of the show questions. So first up, you killed one of the greatest, classics in Freaks and Geeks. Why did you kill it?
So there's actually a documentary on Freaks and Geeks.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, and you can actually hear why I did it. Freaks and Geeks was the most painful thing. It was a show that, like, when I read the script, it spoke to me. Like, that's how I grew up. I knew all those people. And, at the time, what's amazing, and Judd Apatow deserves a lot of credit, and Jake Kasdan, and I gotta redo this again because I can't. Who's the guy? Perfect. Okay. The show was great because Judd Apatow and Jake Kasdan and Paul Feig did an amazing job, and they weren't who they were at the time. Judd was really successful, but he was kind of had a hard time because he had whiffed on a couple of movies, and I think Freaks and Geeks. James Franco was nobody. Seth Rogen just walked on the set. Linda Cardellini. All those people were unknowns, right? And it was really amazing, and I wanted that to win. And I've told Judd this. Judd became a much more hopeful person when he had his kids, was married, had his kids, and he did Knocked Up. And, Knocked Up is basically a pro-life movie. Nobody sees it that way, but it's what it is. And Judd became much more hopeful. And the problem with the show it wasn't that the ratings weren't good, but it got dark at different points. And it was one of the most painful things. And I will tell you that putting that show on, and it was not easy because the salespeople, my bosses thought I was crazy. But I'm very proud of that show because it was different. And ironically, had there been such a thing as, like HBO doing original programming and things like that, and we could run that show without commercials, and it would have been a much better show. So it was a little bit ahead of its time. So but that was painful for me. And the guy who actually gets the blame for it, if you watch the documentary, is a guy I hired named Garth Ancier, who went to Lawrenceville and Princeton and just didn't understand what the hell was going on in the show. So
there you go.
Well, and ironically, I urge everybody to watch that because Judd basically willed all those people to be stars, Jason Segel and all that, just to put it in Garth's face. And he says it in this documentary, that he just wanted to prove that everybody was wrong on this show.
I mean, the cast for that show was unbelievable in terms of what they ultimately went on to do.
But that's all Judd. That's all Judd. That's all Judd. Judd telling Jason Segel, "You're never going to be a leading man in a movie unless you write your own movies." And he wrote Sarah Marshall.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, last question, and I think we're going to sign off. So Uber. So this is one of the most confusing parts of your LinkedIn, is it shows that you're the co-founder and CEO of Uber, but it's not that Uber. Although you were smart enough to buy Uber.com. So tell me about the process, because if I go to Uber.com, it now goes to the Uber that I'm thinking about. What did that process look like? What did did you guys actually get into negotiations? How did it go?
Well,
when did you sell it?
We bought Uber, and everybody said, "You can't have Uber because it has these connotations with the Nazis and this." And I said, "No, I think young people think Uber is this cool thing, and Uber, the car company's never had a problem with any, for those who are too young, the slogan for the Nazis was Uber alles Uber, which means us over everything or something like that." And so we got a lot of pushback on buying it. I liked it because it was a 4-letter word and it meant superlative and all that. And so my co-founder was my cousin and I, we bought it. And then when the company went out of business, the biggest investor was Universal Music. So we gave them the URL as because they put the most money in. And I am sure somebody there sold it for $150,000 instead of 0.5% of stock, which would have been, it would have been like that guy who did the graffiti at the Facebook headquarters, So yes, it was. That was unfortunate. So.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you taking out the time, Scott. I know I learned a lot today, and congratulations again on all the success at Milk. And we'll continue to watch from the sidelines as you guys dominate the world.
Well, I don't know that we're dominating the world. It's not hyperbolic to say that you and your team have been a big part of our success in getting us going, getting us on the right track on this. So we appreciate that. And so because of that, you won't be on the sidelines. You'll be with us out there. So
I love it.
Help.
Of course.
Okay.
All right. Bye, Scott.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hit subscribe now. Earned by Tribe Dynamics. Tribe Dynamics unlocks your social media influencer community. Our platform not only tracks and measures your best influencer relationships, but discovers new influencers to grow your business through earned media. Get started with a demo today at tribedynamics.com. tribedynamics.com.